Yeah, Atiku. No, it's 76 now.
Atiku is
That's it.
87.
That's it. Okay.
On Smooth 98.1.
No.
Are we on? Okay. The local.
Smooth 98.1 here. We are 30 minutes gone past 7 o'clock on a Monday morning. This is Freshly Pressed on Smooth Breakfast. I'm Shokla Martins.
And I'm Victor Peppo. For the next 30 minutes, bringing you detailed analysis, we have Mr. C with a triple E. Good morning, Mr. C.
Good morning, Shopify. Good morning, Victor. Good morning, Lagos.
Yes, wonderful to have you on the show and to get your clear analysis on those stories that we'll be touching on in just a bit. We also want your thoughts, your analysis. Send us your messages. The live stream is on youtube.com/smooth981fm Lagos. Leave your comments up there. You can also send WhatsApp messages into 0809 4440981 or tweet at us and tag us at smooth981fm. Okay, let us get into the stories. Now, the very first one we'll be touching on is quite an interesting statement and stance from the Punch newspaper. APC not Nigeria's problem, says the party's vice chair, and that's the national vice chairman Northwest of the All Progressives Congress, Malam Saliu Lukman, yesterday, saying that it would be actually unfair for anyone to blame the party for the numerous problems plaguing the country. And I'm going to quote him. He said, there are challenges that we are facing today which emerged while APC was in government. But my pride is that our leaders are not in denial of those challenges, unlike in the previous administration. So he's saying that other parties aren't coming up with recommendations, but propaganda to shoot APC down and all that it stands for. So, Mr. C, what I'll ask you is this: is there any merit to his statement and to his stance?
Okay, thank you, Shopify. So, very interesting statement from the National Vice Chairman of the All Progressive Congress. Now, to answer your question directly, there is some merit to what he said, and his statement is not entirely false.
Okay.
Now, Nigeria has had deep-lying structural issues with the way it's been administered, with the way it's been governed, with the way it's been run. There's been a large culture of impunity, and even the way the country has been presently programmed to run, it is programmed to run in such a way there's very little transparency, there's very little accountability, there's very little of anything progressive. So, with from that perspective, he's partially correct. However, to boldly state that APC is not Nigeria's problem is not entirely false too. So here's what it is. Picture a burning fire, a house on fire. The natural response is to fight it with firefighting chemicals and solutions. You don't go
As a firefighter, because the natural response as a human is throw water on the fire.
so you don't throw in dynamite or petrol to the mix. The APC may not have started Nigeria's problems, but they haven't entirely helped in fixing those problems.
Now, in what way would you say?
They displayed an alarming level of incompetence, indifference, and just sheer. They're literally like a deer trapped in front of a car with the headlights on. They don't seem to know what to do. And it's really shocking because they've been in power for 7 years. By now, they would have learned a lesson or two. They had a manifesto which they presented to Nigerians in 2015. On that manifesto, I'm not sure if they're hard pressed, they can point to any of those items and even boldly suggest they've achieved 50%.
Now, Mrs. C, I'm going to stop you there and just throw in another question, right? And what I want to ask is, in your opinion, do you think any other party would have done any better, especially considering the fact that with the huge amounts of cross carpeting that we see as the years go by, and especially with election season here, um, do is there any difference between the parties and their responses to issues that come up and plague Nigeria perennially? Because if government is a continuum, and we have seen changes in administration, then why haven't we seen changes in the issues and the way the issues are being tackled?
Okay, thank you, Shopper. So, irrespective of whatever party was in power, some of these problems will continue to stare us right in the face. And there's no gainsaying that until we get some of these issues right, like restructuring, like introducing and ensuring that justice is implemented across the country without fear or favor, then this will continue. However, if you look at the various parties that have ruled, yes, you will discover that where merit is properly followed, Nigeria is all the better for it. And I'll give you some clear examples. The class of 1979 governors that ruled like there's 12 states in Nigeria, or 19 states in Nigeria, that was an exceptional class because from state to state, what they did speaks volumes almost 30, 40 years after leaving office. Most of the state universities we have in Nigeria came from that class of 79. Most of the developments in each of those states came from that 79 class. Now, let's move forward. Let's fast track early 2000s. The quality of cabinet members we had then was a lot better than the quality we have now. We had finance ministers who knew what they were doing. And it was clear each time you spoke to them or you listened to them, you were inspired. The markets were inspired. The markets were confident that whatever they were saying and whatever they promised to do, they would in fact do it. And it was so good that at some point, we actually got complete debt relief. Yes, because at some point under the Obasanjo regime, we paid off, they discounted our debt, we paid it off, and Nigeria was at some point debt free. Contrast that with the quality of cabinet members we've had over the past 7 years.
So would you say that we're rewarding party members with cabinet positions?
So let's get this straight. There's nothing wrong with rewarding party members with cabinet positions. But for the love of everything good under the sun, make sure they actually know what they're doing.
All right. Let's take it over now to the Vanguard newspaper. Discos. BPE CBN give banks 6 months deadline to quit. Now, the Bureau of Public Enterprises, BPE, and the Central Bank of Nigeria, CBN, has handed down a 6 months deadline to banks, which recently took over the shares of core investors in some electricity distribution companies to exit them. Now, I know there's been this talk about discos owing commercial banks in Nigeria, and now the banks took over, some of those. You would explain that, but I want to tie this into that conversation. I recall that a loan of $500 million was disbursed from the World Bank to help power distribution in Nigeria. How far, how well, where are we with that? $500 million, Mr. C.
Okay, thank you, Victor. So it's the first thing I'm going to correct is the impression that the discos took the loans from the banks. No, the core investors in each of these discos, there are about 5 of them, took loans from banks. So different entities took the loans. Now, I haven't seen any of the loan facility agreements, so I cannot speak to those agreements. However, the banks have purportedly taken over the management and operation of the various discos. Now, the actions of the BP and the banks have currently been challenged in court and I believe arbitration. Now, despite all of this going on, the BP and the CBN now say the discos have a 6-month deadline. That is not actually correct because they say if at the end of 6 months, if they cannot get credible investors to buy in, they then extend it by another 6-month period, and that is it. Now, first question I have to the BP and the CBN: since you are aware of this ongoing litigation, would you be shocked to discover that you will not get any buy within the next 12 months? Because nobody wants to buy title or legal interest in an entity he's not sure he can protect or he will retain. So would it not have made more sense to get the parties involved to the negotiating table, negotiate some exit for them, and then before you seek to bring in investors? Now, with regards to your second question, the BP and CBN say that the interim management of the discos will manage the disbursement of that $500 million World Bank loan. So implicit from their statements is that disbursement has probably not started. I don't have the facts now to confirm or deny that statement, but it's very disturbing that government regulatory agencies government agencies are aware matters are in court. They are aware those matters have not been conclusively determined legally. They are aware arbitration is pending, and you seek to transfer ownership of the discourse to third parties. I don't know how
I'll
that's going
ask
to happen.
another question. We have NEC, which is the regulator for the discos in this country.
Yeah.
What is the role of NEC in all of this? That the commercial banks will now take over discos that supply, power to Nigerians. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, we have AMCON that take over some of this and begin to pay the debts while, the discos would pay back. Why wasn't AMCON brought in, and what is NEC doing basically?
So, very interesting questions you raised. Now, I'm still studying the National Electricity Act. So, I want to believe NEC is saddled with the responsibility of technical operations, not as to ownership and boardroom politics. Now, these monies owed to the banks should have been sold to AMCON. AMCON should have bought those loans.
Right.
Now, if AMCON has not bought those loans, why? Because in the aviation industry, they were quick to take over the loans.
Right.
Now, that's one. So there are questions that need to be answered.
Because AMCON is on the part of the federal government, rather than lose all of these shares to.
And then two, between the CBN and the banks and the interim management, what are the guarantees they will find credible investors who have the technical expertise and have the financial might to properly run these discos within the next 12 months with the shadow of litigation hanging over everything? So it's an unfolding story, and we'll continue to watch as it develops.
Thank you.
Okay, let's take a look at this next article in from the Daily Post. OB slams APC and PDP over failure to increase power generation from 4,000 to 5,000 megawatts. The presidential candidate of the Labour Party, Peter Obi, saying that, well, after failing to deliver its electoral promises, the Nigerians should be ready to kick out both the APC and their major opposition party, the PDP, in the 2023 general elections. And then going on with the rest of the story, we kind of see him campaigning for himself. But going on to focusing rather on that one thing that he talked about, because I'm going to quote him now. He said, the simple thing for Nigerians to ask themselves is, we have been in this business for 24 years. Are we on the right road? And he's talking about the fact that for 24 years, they have not been able to move that the APC and the PDP have not been able to move Nigeria's power generation to where we need it to be. Now, what I'm going to ask is, okay, let's take him at his word, right? And as he campaigns and says, okay, I will do it because I will work tirelessly. But is this something that a Peter Obi can change? Or is it something that we need a whole lot more to change? Because like you said, for 24 years, we've been at this.
Okay.
What's went wrong?
Okay, thank you, Shukla. So it's extremely shameful and quite depressing that for 24 years the target was to move from 4,000 megawatts to about 5,000 or 7,000 megawatts. In South Africa, they're doing 40,000 megawatts easy. With the population size we have, there's absolutely no reason under the sun why we cannot do at least 80,000 megawatts, 100,000 megawatts.
And yet we're not doing that.
No, I'm being serious.
No, but yet we're not doing that.
I'm sorry,
So-
I have to come in here. We're doing 4,000. You're looking for 80,000.
So no, Victor. So you don't wallow in this pond of mediocrity, right? When you have the potential to do so much more, you don't stay where you're doing next to nothing. Now,
Mr. C, we've been at the potential stage for quite a while now.
so clearly the APC and the PDP don't have ideas, and it's shocking that after 24 years, some people will still suggest that we should continue to do the same things and expect different results. Having said that, Mr. Obi in this article was light on details. Maybe because campaign season hasn't started, the debates haven't come yet. I want to believe that at a proper live debate where questions like this will be asked, he will provide more details. Now, since we've tried the two major parties, and for now they seem not to have any ideas, and the presidential candidates for both parties are also equally very light on topical issues, and we're being distracted by issues that have no bearing.
Just a moment, just to put this in, and I don't think that he got the facts entirely correct when he says that we are generating 5,000, because as at March this year,
We're not.
we're generating about 8,000 megawatts with installed capacity of 18,000, but we're distributing below 4,000.
So, Victor, that report isn't entirely correct because our installed capacity from all the Gencos, if they're running full steam, is somewhere between 7,000 and 8,000. But guess what? For the most part of this year, at least 16 Gencos have been down consistently,
Right.
for one reason or the other, due to the complete absence of gas purchase sale agreements with gas suppliers, monies being owed by discos, operational issues, and an inability to source parts because of the worsening naira rate to the dollar. So it's extremely shocking to now read an article that suggests that we've been generating 8,000
Now,
megawatts.
the
This year,
generation, they say, is not the problem. It's the transmission and distribution. We lose power before it gets to the end user.
Victor, you cannot transmit what you haven't generated. I can tell you for certain here, we haven't generated 8,000 megawatts at any point this year.
Okay, now, Mr. C, here's the thing: at the different stages, when it comes from generation to distribution,
Correct.
there seem to be problems. If one is working, the others are not. We've, the panacea of privatization was really just held aloft and said, oh, this is what will fix everything. We saw the privatization of the Gencos. So the transmission company is still not. And then we see the discos as well. Does this mean that, is it that we need to see the privatization of the transmission? What is it that we need to get us to have some sort of electricity where we can be like, oh, this is stable. Wow, there's light in my house. So I don't have to wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning in darkness and then blunder around in darkness to get to work.
So very quickly, let's go back to the privatization route, right? These guys came in, bid for assets they never physically inspected. The first time most of them saw those assets was after they had won. And there was an interim period between when they took the loans, when they won the bids, and when they finally assumed. And in that period, the loans were gathering interest. Now, what has really happened is a fresh round of capital injection should have been done in the power sector. For whatever reason, it hasn't happened. And just like the banks were forced to raise their share capital, just like the insurance companies were forced to raise their share capital, the owners of the discos need to introduce fresh capital, because here it is. A recent World Bank study says, look, you need to spend a minimum of 10 billion US dollars every year for the next 10 years.
Oh, yes.
Just to start.
We remember that.
So there's so many things that need to be done. And until we start to do all of these things, it's not going to get better. But however, some of the discos are entering into partnerships with private companies who will bridge the shortfall in electricity supply. And recently, I think it was last week, Ikeja Discos signed an agreement with a private company to provide power, backup power, and it's integrated or fused into the distribution system. So things will get slightly better, but until we face the elephant in the room, which is funding policy direction,
All
we'll
right.
continue suffering.
Let's look through some of the messages. Naracello from Ogudi saying, how will we change, or how will you change or apologize when you think you're not wrong? APC will never take responsibility for destroying millions of dreams. I agree that the problem started before they came into power, but they tripled every problem and continue to fan the flames instead of putting out the fire.
I'll take this one from YouTube. Olaolu Olagunju says, we allegedly spend so much on power generation with no results for so many years. A new approach is clearly necessary. He also says there are consistent issues within the entire value chain of power in this country. Humans have had electric power for more than 300 years. Our problems are clearly self-driven. We need a new approach.
And Yomi is in on WhatsApp, says, we cleared circa 18 billion US dollars with $16 billion. Let's get it straight, Mr. C. So did we really clear the debt? We would have used same for something more productive. And he goes on, even our hydro generating companies do about 4.5 megawatts.
Oh, we've got some messages on Twitter. At Engineer Strategic says, Mr. CEO, wow, the question is, did APC perform better than previous parties? The answer is no. And on power, it's a discussion made by unqualified people for a long time. Imagine if a Nigeria was run by a private company, power would have been raised to 100. Uh, a
Megawatts.
100 million
No,
megawatts.
no, no.
Wow.
Okay, Dami
Moving
is on,
on.
Dami is on WhatsApp. It says the failure of the Nigerian political class to address our governance misalignments is the reason why we're facing an existential crisis. The moment APC won elections, they took over the problems. The failure to solve the problem is theirs. Nigerian politicians like to hold power and ignore the responsibilities to the populace.
And this message in from Joseph says, from Silver Estate, says the APC leadership from top to bottom. Well, for the past 7 years, we can't actually point out a single one out, any single outstanding minister, lawmaker, governor, or even local government chairman. The previous government had technocrats, experienced people, not paddy system being operated, where you'll see a trained doctor in the Ministry of Education instead of health. And more messages
Even
come.
the petroleum minister, but that's not what we're discussing this time. Let's look at this message from Idima Puza. Why was APC voted in? Was it not to solve our various problems? Excuses can't solve any problem. If they're bereft of ideas of solving our problems, they should jejely resign. We're tired of suffering hardship in Nigeria. The messages are just so much.
And Emo from Ikeja says, good morning. Facebook's headquarters generates 2,000 megawatts. Let that sink in for a while.
People in the APC are shameless. How can you tell Nigerians that they're not the problems in Nigeria when they have showed gross incompetence in all areas of the economy? These guys should keep quiet and not annoy us this early morning.
I don't think they can keep quiet because that's currently the party that's in the administration. They must not keep quiet. They must keep talking so that we can hear what they're saying. Cisco Delgado says, please, Mr. C is absolutely correct. Nigeria has never generated above 5,000 megawatts of electricity, which is very important. By the way, we had our lowest output in 3 months at the end
Oh,
of
yeah.
last month,
Oh,
right?
yeah. I mean, the grid collapsed
We've
more than
seen
5
how
times
many
this year
times the
already.
grid has collapsed. So
Right.
even if we have not been operating at optimum, let's put it that way.
So very quickly, let me throw this in. The frequent system collapses give the lie to that report because why does your system collapse? Because you don't have enough reserve power to wheel in when a generating station goes down. So because it's been so frequent, it means we're not even generating enough power to have a reserve spinning.
All right, let's keep it going, Mr. C. From the Vanguard, very interesting headline. I hope we can touch this in perhaps less than 2 minutes.
Okay.
Telecom workers reject planned hike in telecommunications tax.
Okay, good for them. Very quickly, good for them. Now this telecoms tax, actually, it's the wrong time to implement it because ultimately, when it's implemented, it's you and I who will pay for this tax. However, whether they reject it or not is not the issue because if the government says, go ahead, we want to collect the tax, unless they want to confront the government, they will have to pay. Now, the question is given the severe hardship in the country today, there are at least 60% or 70% of Nigerians currently, if I'm not mistaken, live on less than $2 a day. Let that sink in. You then want to impose a telecoms tax. You're planning to move VAT from 7.5% to about 12 or 12.5%. In the same country, you need to get rid of the fuel subsidy. You need to get rid of the electricity subsidies. You need to get rid of all sorts of subsidies. What is going on? Surely there must be better plans than just raising taxes on everything because for people to pay the taxes, they must be earning money first. And you're more likely to get defaulters because they have to eat, they have to survive first. And what will then happen is the telecoms companies will see a sharp drop in revenue. And when that happens and their costs do not also drop in that same direction, downwards, southwards, the next thing that will happen will be retrenchment. More Nigerians will be thrown into the unemployment market. And for every Nigerian employed, he probably has 2 to 4 dependents, directly and indirectly, thereby worsening the state of poverty in the country. Is this the direction we're going in? And is this a reason why the APC should be allowed to get its candidate voted in? Nigerians, get your PVCs, educate yourself on the issues, get information on the pertinent matters, the
All right,
pertinent
Mr. Singh.
questions.
Thank you.
All right, and very quickly from the nation, NANS mobilizes for NLC's nationwide strike over ASU. So the students' body has said that it's going to be joining forces with labor centers comprising NLC and TUC until the federal government reaches an agreement with ASU. Mr. C.
Okay, so very quickly,
Mm-hmm.
ASU, regrettably and very sadly, has been on strike for at least close to 6 months, right? And there's been no solution in sight. The president on the 19th of July gave the education minister a 2 week ultimatum to deliver results.
It was 6 months yesterday, the strike.
No. The ultimatum was from the 19th of July.
Yeah,
It
yeah,
was
yeah.
3 weeks.
So it's this.
No. I'm saying the ASU strike was from 14th of February. So yesterday, 14th of August, made it 6 months.
Okay.
Correct. Now,
Yeah.
this week will make it a month since the president gave his ultimatum.
Wow, it's really actually been a month. I haven't thought it was
Wow.
3 weeks.
So,
1 month.
so it speaks to the level of Nigeria is literally like a plane without a pilot. The plane's just moving. There's nobody in the cockpit. How do you, as the president, give a directive with a clear deadline of 2 weeks? That deadline is not met. 2 weeks after, there's no result, and everyone's sitting pretty, looking happy.
Again, if we look at it, the president asked for a report in 2 weeks.
Clearly, Victor, we're saying the same thing. He didn't get the report in 2 weeks. There were no consequences, no sanctions. 2 weeks after the deadline, still no consequences, still no sanctions, still no way forward.
Sad. But let's see if we can throw this other story in before we get to some more messages. Again, less than 2 minutes if we can touch on this one. Nigerian army lacks modern equipment required to fight terrorism. Aline Dube, who is the Senate chairman on army, is the one saying we lack modern equipment to deal with this terrorism.
So Senator Nduma is partly correct, but that's not the only reason. The Nigerian army is poorly motivated. They don't have the right numbers because it's stretched thing all over the country. Right now, I think they're operating in about 23 or 24 states, conducting one military operation or the other. There's the issue of compromise, there's the issue of morale, there's the issue of funding. It's a whole hot mess.
Now, 23 out of 36 states, I want to agree that the military is overstretched, but we keep budgeting. If you look at military funding every year, wouldn't you think that we should have made appreciable success with the fight against terrorism?
So guess what? You're funding them in Naira, right? Now, you must realize that between the period when the money is voted and when it is actually released, the Naira has lost value. We don't manufacture those weapons in Nigeria. The ammunition is not manufactured in Nigeria. The equipment is not here. By the time you want to buy it, the money is almost useless because then the cost has gone up. So really, we're not yet ready to face our issues. And these are some of the issues I would like to see discussed at the debates.
Very quickly, because it's such an interesting story. From the Punch newspaper, Senate knocks NSITF over misappropriation of 17.2 billion naira. They're saying that the Nigeria Social Insurance Trust Fund has refused to justify its spending of 17.158 billion naira in 2019, and they're saying termites.
So
Termites ate the paperwork.
So this is just one hot mess, right? So 2013, so 17.5 billion was, or 17 billion plus was spent. No documents. And the question was asked. We then understand that some individual put them in an abandoned container and termites allegedly ate and destroyed the physical records.
We have very interesting animals in this country, always eating stuff.
So, final note, where are the electronic records? We're not serious in this country, and I'm not going to say anything more on this story.
They didn't submit their annual financial statements since 2010. That's 12 years, but it's okay. Let's just take some messages to close out the show, shall we?
All right, we'll begin with Chibuza, who is saying, do we enjoy the standard of living and general hardship of the populace, insecurities everywhere, poor government, economic policies? It's time to vote right, not based on ethnicity and sentiments.
And Taya says, poor intelligence gathering, compromise with their rank and file, yet it's weapons they're looking for.
Please, what modern equipment does the ragtag bandits have? Ndume should get serious, please. EK sent that across to us.
And Cisco Delgado says, Mr. C, preach to Nigerians, please. Whilst B from Lucky says the core investors' agreement with the banks was collateralized with their shares, so bank takeover is expected. Amcon does not take over every loan. South Africa is different because 40% of its power needs is channeled to the mining sector, and its GDP per capita is much higher. They can pay for the generation.
And sincerely, I wonder why we still spend our precious time analyzing APC and PDP. There's not too much left by these two parties. He goes on, gambling with them again will be too dicey. He goes on and on. But thank you very much. We need to go.
All right, and that is that we are done. But you can always find Mr. C online. He's on social media at Monsieur C across the platforms, and that Monsieur C is with the triple E after the C. Mr. C, as usual, it was a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you for your analysis, and can't wait for you to come back into the studio. Coming up, it is going to be sports time as we talk Manchester United and other things inside the locker room. That's at
I didn't see that
8:15.
coming.
Oh, you
8:15.
should have. We'll be right back.
Is it Chega or Ini?
In his nose.
Okay.